once we introduced Scandi PWA technology, we also had to expand our SEO scope with pre-rendering question, and specifically pre-render service setup. And before digging specifically into pre-render solutions and how to set them up and how they are working, let's a bit better understand what's behind this technology and why it's causing some challenges for SEO. So, majority of the websites which are available in the world currently are based on server-side rendering. And that's pretty straightforward. So how it's working? User makes a request goes to server, and server sends over to the user rendered HTML code. So browser displays the page. In practice, if you open a page, for example, sportsdirect.com, and look into page source, we can actually see that it's really long. And we have there all the links, images, icons, texts, any descriptions if there are any, metadata, titles, H1s, etc. So everything is here. So also crawlers just opening source code, accessing source code, can get all this information very easily. So that's basically how it works. When we are speaking of Scandi PWA or any other heavy JavaScript-based website, single page application, progressive web apps, so it becomes a bit more complex. As such, websites are using so-called client-side rendering. So what's happening in this case? User still makes a request and tries to open a website. Request is sent to the server, and server, instead of rendered HTML, sends JavaScript containers plus some very basic HTML. And in this case, browser, either it's Chrome, Safari, or Microsoft Edge, is the one which renders the page. And then it's displayed. So again, if we move to existing page built on Scandi PWA, it's sportland.lv, and view the page source code. That's it. Not much to scroll. And here are only JavaScript files. And this is what crawlers, search engine crawlers, and also social media crawlers or ad-related services, this is what they see. Not much. So what is there? Some fonts and JavaScript files, mainly. And that's it. And favicon. And what is happening? So basically, in this case, same as our browser needs to do the job in order to render the page. In this case, also crawlers, after seeing this code, actually would need to download JavaScript files and render them. And it requires resources. And not all resources, not all crawlers, not all search engines, not all social networks are capable of doing that. And this gap between these two source codes is actually the challenge we need to solve. So all content versus none of the content. And that's why in this video, we will explain, first of all, how Google does the crawling, and also how we can work around this challenge. If our Chrome on our laptop can easily and pretty quickly render JavaScript, then like in scale of one user, it's okay. However, Google has to crawl basically the whole internet. It's a like unbelievably big numbers. So like I'm not sure if anyone knows how many websites there are in the world and how many URLs there are. So what is happening that Google bot, the simple good old Googlebot, is rendering only HTML. So if it would go like to Scandi PWA and try to open it, it would get like some page title and that's it. The rest would be, you need to enable JavaScript to see this application. So nothing more. So what is the thing? That obviously as Google also is promoting PWAs quite actively and that many websites uses JavaScript, it can't ignore this situation like completely. So Google actually is able to process JavaScript heavy websites. However, how it's happening? That when the new page appears, it gets to crawl queue. So it's like we submitted the XML sitemap and there were added some few new URLs. They are getting in the queue. Then arrives crawler from Google, crawls HTML, sees that there's a lot of JavaScript, puts a website in or like specific URL in rendering queue, arrives more advanced renderer which is able to process JavaScript and like open JavaScript, renders. Then Google is processing the whole page, understanding the content, reading all structured data markup, and only then it gets to index. So HTML is like faster, and for JavaScript we get some additional steps. So we get, so like Google can process JavaScript, but it's delayed. It may take weeks more, days more, weeks more, and for e-commerce sometimes it's quite crucial to get Google index your page as fast as possible. If Google is more advanced, Bing is not so advanced. Bing, Yandex, Baidu, etc. crawlers have problems with JavaScript. So you might kill your like organic traffic from other search engines if rely only on client-side rendering. And also Facebook, Slackbot, and other bots often are not able to process JavaScript. So you might have problems with social shares, maybe also with some advertisement and other marketing channels. So, and even if Google is actually able to process your website, it's not always happening fully. So for example, there was example from one PWA project. If we test how Google sees the page, it sees it blank. So yeah, it can process JavaScript, but there might be some additional issues. So blank page obviously is not is not very appealing for Google, so most likely it won't rank, although it's actually a specific product, something about chocolate pencil or something like that. So how can we avoid the issues with limitations? Obviously there is a workaround and it's called dynamic rendering. And here we have a bit more complicated graph. And what is the idea? That when we have a requests coming to the server, they are split into parts. So crawlers, which might include Googlebot, Bingbot, Slackbot, Facebookbot, etc., etc., they get a bit more complicated structure, and so basically there is appearing another service which renders HTML. So it picks JavaScript, transfers it to the HTML, and passes to crawlers. And users are left with Chrome doing all the job for themselves. So that's how we actually can make sure that Google gets pre-rendered HTML. For our projects, we are using service called prerender.io, which is offering dynamic pre-rendering. It's a service which is recommended by Google, and we have tried various ones, also free and also paid. And this one has proven to be one of the best ones and causing us less headache as it comes with less bugs at the end. What to take into consideration? It's paid service, as I mentioned, and the costs are calculated based on two factors. Factor one is cache freshness. Basically, this factor stands for amount of days certain page is cached in prerender.io. Quite simple. So if you set this indicator to 7 days, it means that each 7 days the cache will be refreshed automatically. Normally, like 7 days sounds more or less okay. What to take into consideration that in case if stock is very often changing, you might end up in the situation that after 7 days, reality on the website and reality in prerender.io is not matching at all. So basically, people would go to pages they see in Google, but they're actually non-existing anymore. Or vice versa, that maybe some new pages are not discovered by Google in a timely manner. So we had cases when cache freshness in other projects was set for 20 days or so. Just need to be careful so that your website doesn't become outdated. Another factor to take into consideration is amount of total pages your website is having, and that's how monthly costs are calculated here. So based on cache freshness and amount of pages you want to cache. We want to cache only unique pages. So PLPs, PDPs, blog, etc. So nothing which contains query parameters often, usually. How it's set up? Setup is done by us. We have some guides for that. By us, I mean by ScanDev. It can be developers or those can be DevOps. In Ready Images, pretty easily. For standalone projects, it takes maybe a bit more effort to do the setup, but overall it's already something which is done quite often. However, certainly there should be QA done by SEO team to ensure that everything is working correctly. If it's standalone project, then you also need to contact prerender.io service to ensure that it is enabling image download for your project. Otherwise, by default, prerender.io is not allowing to download images for Scandi PWA, which affects the rendering of the page. So basically all images appear as non-existing, which is not cool, obviously. What else? If you want to calculate amount of pages and get the most optimal cache freshness, this is also something you can consult with our SEO team. and also to understand what to include in caching, what not to include in caching, etc. And now let's explore how pre-render IO is used in practice. So here we have a NetNutri project, which is our one of our clients, which have this pre-live version of Scandi PWA available. So we are on PDP currently. The page is selling various supplements, vitamins, etc. And this is Amazing Herbs Premium Black Seed Oil. There are a lot of really cool things here. For example, there are reviews. Okay, one review. Some small description, similar products, quite detailed product details, and I know that client is writing them individually for each project. So quite a lot of good stuff for Google. Images as well. So this we can take as an example of pretty solid product description page. We are currently visiting the page as any user would. But now let's imagine that we are Googlebot, which is first time visiting the page after the go live. And obviously it's not the advanced user agent, this Googlebot, which is able to render JavaScript easily. Therefore, what we are doing, we are disabling JavaScript, as that's how Google operates. Let's refresh the page and we see that all content is gone. So it's just here. You need to enable JavaScript to run this application. And even if we, so there's no even proper page title visible. So that's it, empty page. Same would happen if we would try to share the page on the Facebook, blank page. So, pretty sad, indeed. That's why we need pre-render IO. So, in this specific pre-live website, we already have it set up. Therefore, what I'm doing now, I will enable user agent Googlebot. So, because what we do, we are not pre-rendering HTML for everyone. It just doesn't make sense. So we have a list of user agents, including Googlebot. I could also write here Bingbot or Facebook or some specific social networks or search engines. So for this user agent, we actually, it's in whitelist for pre-render IO service. So what we are doing now, it's enabled. Let's do hard reload. And you see the content is back. JavaScript is still disabled. So everything what we got here, it's passed to us through pre-render IO. And what we see, review here, small description is here, similar products as well, and yeah, the long product description. Also, like all the tags in code, for example, meta title, looking as it should, and we see it also here. So now, for these user agents, Googlebot, Facebook, etc., we will have this version of the site served. There are still some limitations. For example, if you have menu loaded, for example, not initially, but on some hover or click, then pre-render IO won't see that. Or if you have some content hidden in tabs, maybe it also won't see that. So it's very important to make sure that this final HTML is optimized. All important elements are loaded on the first load so that pre-render IO could grasp them. And that you have also images optimized and don't have any like 5 megabyte images of products hanging somewhere there, because it will affect speed for pre-render. So that's example how it works in real life.